Captain Anya Valen stood before the holographic display, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The faces of her senior officers stared back at her, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and skepticism. Earth had been on the losing side of the war for so long that the idea of negotiating peace seemed like a fool's errand. Yet, the briefing she had just received had painted a different picture, one that forced her to question everything she thought she knew about survival. The Silent Accord, the emissary had called it, a name that had the weight of ancient secrets behind it. Humanity's final shot at saving what was left of Earth, but it came with risks that no one could predict. Are we seriously considering this? Commander Roland Graves, her first officer, broke the silence. His voice was thick with disbelief, and his jaw clenched as though the very idea of negotiating with the Zelarak Empire tasted foul on his tongue. Graves, Anya replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. We're not considering it. We're doing it. There is no other option. Her words echoed in the room, and she could feel the weight of them. The Zelarak had shown no mercy in their conquest of human colonies, reducing thriving civilizations to ash. They had wiped out Earth's fleet, taken prisoners, and turned entire populations into refugees, scattered across the stars. Yet, amidst the violence and carnage, a sliver of hope had appeared, a rumor of a covert peace meeting that had been taking place between select alien factions who were tired of the endless war. Human intelligence had intercepted a few key communications, enough to believe there was something to it. Peace with the Zelarak. Graves continued, shaking his head. Anya, you know how much they hate us. They see us as nothing more than vermin to crush underfoot. If we approach them with anything other than submission, they'll wipe us out faster than we can blink. I know, Anya said, her eyes narrowing. But there are things in motion that we don't fully understand. Alliances, hidden alliances. If we can broker peace with the right groups, if we can even force the Zelarak to the table, we might have a chance. A slim one, but it's a chance. Her voice softened, and for a moment, she allowed herself to reflect on the cost of this gamble. Earth's resources were almost depleted. The fleet had no reinforcements, and the colonies were falling one by one. What would it mean to surrender to the Zelarak? What kind of future would they have under their rule? But she couldn't afford to think about that now. The war had stretched on for far too long, and the toll it had taken on her people was unimaginable. Who are we negotiating with? Asked Lieutenant Murahiden, the communications officer, her eyes scanning the data on her console. Anya turned toward her, locking eyes with the young officer. That's the problem. We don't know. Not yet, but we got a lead. There's a station on the outer rim, a neutral zone. It's been a meeting place for factions seeking peace, and we need to be there. Soon. Graves stepped forward, his brow furrowed. And you want us to go there, alone, with no backup? Anya met his gaze, unwavering. We'll be a small team. We'll need to blend in, stay under the radar. The Zelarak can't know we're coming. If they suspect anything, they'll crush us before we can even speak a word. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but they all knew there was no other choice. If humanity had any hope of surviving, this was it. The Silent Accord, hidden in the shadows of the galaxy, was their final shot at peace or extinction. Prepare the ship, Anya commanded, her voice firm. We leave in an hour. As she turned to leave the briefing room, her heart pounded in her chest. The Silent Accord could be humanity's salvation, or its final mistake. There was no way to know. But as the weight of the decision settled on her shoulders, Anya knew one thing for certain. She would see it through, no matter the cost. The war was far from over. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the steel walls, a constant reminder that they were deep in enemy territory, headed straight into the unknown. Captain Anya Valen stood at the bridge's command station, her fingers tracing the edges of a star map that showed their route to the neutral station. The stars outside twinkled like distant diamonds, cold and indifferent to the lives of those who passed through the dark void. She had always felt at home in the silence of space. But tonight, it was different. Tonight, it was a silence that felt more like a tomb. The crew was already restless. The tension was palpable, but they had no choice but to press forward. Anya could feel the unease in her officers, each of them grappling with their own doubts about the mission. She had insisted on this, insisted on the peace talks. Now she needed to convince them it was the right call. They needed to trust her. "Captain," Commander Graves spoke up, his voice low. He was standing behind her, studying the data stream flashing across the screen. "There's something strange about this route. The trajectory you've set. It's almost too perfect. You sure this is the safest path?" Anya didn't answer right away, her mind racing as she considered the risks. There was always a possibility that the Zelrak were aware of the route. They were too cunning, too thorough. Still, the station's coordinates had been intercepted in a scrambled transmission. Everything pointed to this being the only viable meeting point for the Silent Accord, the perfect place for a clandestine negotiation. "Unsure," Anya replied, masking the hesitation in her voice. "We're going to make it. I know the risks." Graves didn't look convinced, but he said nothing more. Instead, he turned to his station and began running another sweep for any Zelrak patrols in the vicinity. They were close now, too close. The ship glided through the dark void, its low-profile design cutting through space like a shadow. The Endeavor was one of the last ships humanity had, and its size and outdated technology made it the ideal candidate for a covert mission. No one would suspect that a warship with its battle scars and patched-up systems was carrying humanity's last hope. Anya couldn't afford to be seen. They had to reach the neutral station before anyone noticed their presence. The ship's sensors pinged. Graves's voice cut through the tense quiet. "Captain, incoming transmission." "From who?" Anya asked sharply, her hand instinctively gripping the armrest of her chair. "It's encrypted," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I can't get a read on the source, but it's coming from within the neutral zone." "Put it through," Anya ordered. The holographic display flared to life, and a shadowy figure materialized in front of them. It was a humanoid alien, its features hard to make out, shrouded in layers of darkness. Its voice was distorted, robotic almost, and it spoke with the kind of authority that sent a chill down Anya's spine. "Captain Valen," the voice intoned, "your arrival has been anticipated. Do not trust anyone on the station. The Silent Accord is a lie, a trap to expose you. Leave now, or you will be destroyed." The message cut out abruptly, and the figure dissolved into static. Anya froze. The warning had been cryptic, ominous, and it didn't leave much room for doubt. "Do we engage?" Graves asked, his voice steady but carrying an edge of tension. "No," Anya replied, her heart racing. "We stay on course. This could be a test. They want us to turn back, but we're not backing down." She looked around the bridge. Her officers were watching her, waiting for direction. It was clear to her now that the peace talks weren't just about bringing two sides together. They were about survival, and someone was trying to stop them before they even arrived. "Increase stealth protocols. No signals. Full comms blackout," Anya ordered, her voice firm. "Everyone stay sharp. We've come this far, and we're not turning back now." As the crew scrambled to follow her orders, Anya's mind churned with the implications of the message. Who had sent it? And why? Was it an ally trying to protect them, or an enemy looking to sabotage their mission? There was no way to know. But one thing was certain. The galaxy was full of shadows, and not all of them could be trusted. The Endeavor glided deeper into the neutral zone, its fate, and humanity's, hanging in the balance. The neutral station loomed ahead, a sprawling complex of metal and glass suspended in the blackness, tucked away in the heart of a forgotten star system. It was supposed to be a place of peace, a sanctuary for those desperate to escape the endless war. The station's architecture, a blend of old-world elegance and industrial efficiency, was a far cry from the sleek, intimidating designs of the Zelrak warships. As the Endeavour approached, Anya's gaze locked onto the massive docking bay. Her crew was tense, awaiting any sign of danger. The warning they'd received still echoed in her mind, its cryptic message gnawing at her thoughts. Docking procedures initiated. Lieutenant Hayden's voice broke the silence, a quiet but welcome signal that they were nearing their destination. "Keep your eyes open," Anya ordered, standing up from her chair and walking toward the comm station. "We don't know who's on that station yet, and we're not taking any chances." The ship's hull groaned as it made contact with the station's docking bay, the air thick with anticipation. The station was silent, almost too silent. No welcoming committee, no security scans, just the oppressive stillness of a place long abandoned by trust. Anya had expected something more, but the absence of any official presence made her uneasy. The airlock hissed as it opened, and the crew, clad in the station's standard-issue attire, filed out in single file, weapons concealed beneath cloaks. Anya led the way, her heart pounding in her chest, though she gave nothing away on her face. The silence was deafening as they moved deeper into the station's heart, the hum of the artificial gravity fields and the soft creak of aging infrastructure their only companions. They were met by a small group of figures in dark robes, aliens, their features blurred beneath hoods, their voices almost drowned in static as they introduced themselves in heavily distorted tones. One of them stepped forward, its silhouette faintly visible beneath the hood. "Captain Valen." The alien's voice reverberated, too deep and too smooth. "You and your crew are far from safe here. This station is a crucible, forged for purposes you cannot yet comprehend." Anya's eyes narrowed, her instincts screaming that something was off. "What do you mean?" "We came to negotiate peace. This is a neutral ground." The figure chuckled, the sound low and unsettling. "There is no peace without sacrifice, human. You think the Zelrak will allow you to broker anything without a cost. We are but players in a game far older than your kind can imagine." A sudden surge of unease shot through Anya. She exchanged a brief glance with Graves, who had positioned himself a few steps behind her. There was no turning back now. They were already too deep, and the information they had gathered, however cryptic, was enough to tell her that humanity's survival depended on pushing forward, even if the cost was unknown. Before Anya could respond, a second figure emerged from the shadows, this one larger, more imposing, with glowing, angular eyes that reflected an unnatural light. The alien's armor gleamed with an eerie blue tint, its movements precise and deliberate. "You have no time," the new figure said, its voice metallic and cold. "The Zelrak already know you're here. They're watching this station. Every move you make, every word you speak is being monitored. You think your stealth is enough to hide your presence, but their reach extends farther than you believe." Anya's throat tightened. How could they have known? They were supposed to be under the radar, concealed, unseen. A whisper of doubt flickered in her mind, but she pushed it aside. She had no time for hesitation. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice strong despite the tension building inside her. The alien didn't answer right away. Instead, it reached into the folds of its robe and pulled out a small spherical device. It hovered for a moment, suspended in the air as though responding to some unseen force. A projection flickered to life above it. A map of the galaxy, with several red marks indicating major Zelrak strongholds. "We want you to understand what you're dealing with," the figure said, its voice thick with unspoken warning. "The Zelrak will not make peace with you. They will use this meeting as a trap, and you will be their bait. We need you to expose them for what they truly are. If you don't, there will be no peace. There will only be death." Anya's heart sank. The gravity of the situation hit her like a sledgehammer. They were playing a game, yes, but it wasn't one of their choosing, and the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. "Then what do you propose?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The alien's glowing eyes fixed on her. Survive. Find the truth. Uncover what the Zelrak are hiding before they find you. You are not the only ones being watched, and you are far from the only ones who seek the end of this war. With those final words, the figure vanished into the shadows. The room felt colder. Anya turned to her team, the weight of their mission now more urgent than ever. They were no longer just diplomats. They were now players in a deadly game, and the rules were more complicated than she could have ever imagined. Graves spoke first, his voice grim. We can't trust any of them. The Zelrak are already onto us, and I don't think they're the only ones watching. Anya nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we stay focused. We do what we came here to do, and we find out who's really behind this before it's too late. The air in the station's grand meeting hall was thick with tension. The flickering lights above did little to mask the oppressive atmosphere, and every footstep echoed too loudly in the hollow space. Anya and her crew stood before a long oval table surrounded by alien dignitaries, their faces obscured by veils of shadow. The Zelrak's representatives had finally arrived. Anya studied them carefully, tall, imposing, with features that seemed designed to intimidate rather than communicate. Their sleek armor gleamed in the dim light, and their sharp, angular eyes glowed with a cold intensity. Ambassador Threx, the leader of the Zelrak delegation, stood at the far end of the table. He was every bit the picture of aloof authority, his presence like a weight pressing down on the room. His formality was a deliberate tactic, one meant to make it clear that the Zelrak were in control. Anya stepped forward, her crew flanking her on either side. She fought to keep her face neutral, despite the unease gnawing at her. This was the moment they had prepared for, the one that could decide humanity's fate. But as she looked around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being played. The cryptic warnings, the hidden alliances, the betrayal already lurking beneath the surface. It all seemed too calculated. Threx's voice cut through the silence, sharp and dismissive. Captain Valen, he said, his tone laced with disdain. We have indulged you by allowing this meeting to take place. You should consider it an honor, not a privilege. Your people will learn the price of peace, if peace is what you truly desire. Anya held his gaze. We desire the survival of both our species, she replied, her voice steady. We've been at war for far too long. Enough lives have been lost. This meeting is our chance to end the violence, once and for all. Threx's lip curled in what could only be described as a smirk. Humanity has a short memory, Captain. You are nothing but a pawn in a much larger game. Your race has already proven its weakness. You are ripe for subjugation. All that remains is how you will bend. Anya's fists tightened at her sides. She wanted to lash out, to make him understand how wrong he was, but she couldn't afford to lose control. This wasn't the time for bravado. It was a time for strategy. I've seen the devastation you've caused, she said, her voice cold, matching his. I've witnessed entire colonies reduced to rubble. If you want to talk about weakness, Ambassador, look no further than your own people. You strike when your enemy is broken, when they're at their weakest. That's not strength. That's cowardice. The Zelrak ambassador's expression remained unchanged, but Anya could sense the anger simmering beneath the surface. She had struck a nerve, but it didn't matter. She had no illusions about what Threx thought of her or humanity. The real question was whether or not he would negotiate. Threx's gaze hardened. Enough, he growled, his tone cutting through the air like a blade. You will listen to our terms. You will surrender unconditionally. The war ends with your people in chains. Only then will we consider peace. Anya's heart sank. She had expected this, expected nothing less from the Zelrak. They wouldn't negotiate on equal terms. They wouldn't compromise. This wasn't peace. It was a demand for unconditional surrender, one that left humanity with no room to breathe. Those are your terms, she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Surrender or die. Threx nodded. That is the only peace you will ever know." The room fell into a tense silence, and Anya could feel her crew stiffen. Graves shot her a worried glance. The rest of the team was on edge, each of them silently weighing their options. This wasn't the peace they had hoped for. It was a trap, a calculated maneuver meant to force humanity's hand. Anya knew they couldn't accept these terms, not if they wanted to live with any shred of dignity. But they were running out of options. Earth was all but destroyed, their fleet decimated. To refuse Threx's terms was to declare war once more, but they couldn't afford to lose any more lives. As Anya stood there, the weight of her decision pressing down on her, she felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Lieutenant Hayden, her face pale. She leaned in close, whispering in Anya's ear, "Captain, we've got a problem. Someone on the station is sending a signal. Unauthorized." Anya's stomach twisted. "Who?" Hayden shook her head. "I can't trace it yet, but it's coming from somewhere deep in the station's core. It's too dangerous to ignore." Threx's voice broke into their conversation. "Is something the matter, Captain? We don't have all day. The terms are simple. Accept them or face the consequences." Anya's heart raced. There was a mole on the station. Someone was playing both sides, and they might be working with the Zelarak. "We'll consider your offer," Anya said, her voice even, though every muscle in her body screamed to lash out. "But we'll need time to deliberate." Threx's eyes narrowed. "You'll have until the end of this meeting. Make your choice, or we will make it for you." Anya turned away, her mind spinning. She had no time to waste. The signal, the mole, the betrayal, it was all starting to converge. Something was wrong, very wrong, and if they didn't act fast, the Zelarak might not be the only threat they had to face. The trap was closing in. Anya's mind raced as she turned away from Threx, her fingers curling into tight fists. The pressure in the room felt suffocating, every breath a struggle as the weight of the decision bore down on her. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now, not with everything hanging in the balance. And yet, the offer Threx had presented was nothing short of an ultimatum. Surrender or die. No negotiation, no compromise. The unknown signal that Hayden had detected pulsed in her mind like a second heartbeat, a constant reminder that there was more at play here than just a simple peace negotiation. The mole on the station, the betrayal, it all pointed to a deeper conspiracy, one that threatened not only their mission but humanity's very survival. "Captain," Graves's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to find him standing beside her, his face taut with concern. "We can't stay here. The Zelarak will only let us bargain for so long. The longer we wait, the more likely they'll make good on their threat." Anya met his gaze, a deep sense of urgency flashing in her eyes. "I know, but we can't just walk away from this. If we accept their terms, it's over. We'll be nothing more than slaves to their empire." Graves nodded grimly. "But if we refuse, we risk triggering another war we can't win. Our fleet is a shadow of its former self. We're barely holding on." The truth of his words settled like a weight on Anya's chest. They were trapped between two equally dangerous choices. But then, another thought surfaced. If there was a mole here, someone working against them, could they not be the key to turning this entire situation on its head? The mole might have information, leverage that could change everything. Anya's gaze flickered toward Hayden, who was still at her station, scanning the data for any signs of the unauthorized transmission source. She walked over, her voice low. "Lieutenant, any luck?" Hayden's fingers flew across the console. "I've isolated the signal, Captain, but it's encrypted beyond anything I've seen before. I'm still trying to crack it, but it's coming from somewhere deep within the station, likely a secure location." "Get on it," Anya ordered. "I need that signal decoded as quickly as possible. If someone here is playing both sides, we need to know who and why." Hayden nodded, her eyes narrowed in concentration as she dove into the task. Anya took a step back, allowing the lieutenant to focus, but her thoughts were still racing. What could they possibly gain from this? A mole in the enemy's camp could be valuable, yes, but it could also be a trap. If the Zellerak were watching them so closely, they had likely anticipated every move. But there was a deeper feeling gnawing at Anya, something in the back of her mind that she couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the threat of the Zellerak. It was the way the station felt. Empty, abandoned. The alliances, the words of the shadowy figures they'd met earlier, and now the presence of the mole. It was as if the entire galaxy was aligned against them. They had come here to broker peace, but instead they were standing on the edge of a precipice with no clear way down. "Captain." Haydn's voice snapped Anya out of her thoughts. "I got something." "The signal. It's coming from the main reactor. A restricted area. Whoever it is, they don't want us anywhere near it." Anya's heart skipped a beat. The main reactor was the core of the station, a location heavily guarded by the station's security systems. If someone was hiding there, they were either incredibly bold or incredibly dangerous. Either way, it confirmed one thing. The stakes were much higher than anyone had realized. "Graves," Anya said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Get the team. We're going to the reactor." Graves raised an eyebrow, a mixture of surprise and concern flickering across his face. "Captain, that's a restricted zone. If we're caught." "We won't be caught," Anya interrupted, her eyes hardening with determination. "We need to find out who's behind this. If we don't, this entire mission will fall apart." The commander nodded, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Understood. I'll assemble a team." As Graves moved to rally the crew, Anya turned back toward the Zellerak delegation. Threx was still watching them, his cold gaze never wavering. His arrogance was palpable. He knew the power he held in this room. But Anya wasn't going to let him dictate the terms any longer. She would find the truth, even if it meant defying everything they thought they knew about the situation. The Endeavor's crew was ready. She was ready. They would get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. As Anya stepped away from the Zellerak, her mind was clear. They weren't just fighting for peace. They were fighting to expose a deeper conspiracy that threatened to swallow them all. The corridors of the station were eerily silent as Anya and her team made their way toward the main reactor. Every step echoed, amplifying the tension that had gripped the crew since the Zellerak's chilling ultimatum. Graves, Haydn, and two other members of the crew, armed and alert, moved with practiced precision. Anya led the way, her mind focused on the task at hand, but her senses were alive to every shadow, every creak of the station's aging infrastructure. The deeper they ventured into the station, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The station's usual hum of activity was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost suffocating stillness. It was as if the place itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "The reactor's up ahead," Haydn whispered, her voice tense. "We're close." Anya nodded, but a flicker of doubt passed through her. The deeper they went, the more the feeling that they were being watched grew. The hidden signal, the mole, the vague warnings they'd received, all of it pointed to something far more sinister. She couldn't shake the thought that they were walking right into a trap. But there was no turning back now. They had to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. As they rounded a corner, they'd reached a sealed door leading into the reactor's core. The security panel beside it flickered, an ominous red light flashing in warning. Anya stepped forward, her fingers hovering over the controls, trying to keep her breath steady. "There's no way we'll be able to bypass this without triggering alarms," Haydn said, her voice a low murmur. "This door's reinforced with a level 3 encryption. We'll need to hack it." Anya shot her a look. "Then do it. We don't have much time." Haydn quickly set to work, her hands moving rapidly over the control panel. The seconds stretched into minutes as the tension in the air mounted. Anya couldn't help but glance back at Graves, who was scanning the hallway for any signs of movement. The silence around them felt unnatural, oppressive. Finally, with a soft beep, the panel's red light turned green, and the door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor leading to the reactor's central chamber. A low, throbbing hum filled the air, the sound of the station's core generating power. The scent of coolant and metal permeated the air, sharp and sterile. "Stay alert," Anya ordered, stepping forward. "We don't know what we'll find in there." The crew filed in behind her, weapons raised and eyes scanning every shadow. As they moved deeper into the chamber, Anya's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The reactor's core was heavily guarded by automated security drones, but there were no signs of any patrols. It was as if the station had been abandoned, but in a way that felt calculated, deliberate. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the silence became. Then, as they rounded a corner, they found it. A room tucked away in the depths of the reactor, locked and sealed, just as Hayden had predicted. The signal had been coming from here, and now they were standing at its threshold. Anya nodded to Graves, who stepped forward, scanning the door's security systems. "It's a different kind of encryption," he muttered under his breath. "This one's much more advanced than anything we've seen." "There's no time for subtlety," Anya said, her voice hard. "Get us inside." Graves didn't hesitate. He worked quickly, using a series of bypass codes to crack the door's security, the display flickering as the encryption failed. The moment the door slid open, they were met with a scene that stopped them in their tracks. Inside the room was a large, high-tech communications array, its systems flashing with an eerie red light. But that wasn't the most alarming part. At the center of the room was a figure, hooded and bent over a console. Its movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, and when it straightened, Anya's blood ran cold. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face she never thought she'd see again. "Commander Aaron." Anya's voice barely whispered the name, her heart lurching in disbelief. The man standing before her was the last person she'd expected to encounter in the depths of the station. Aaron had been part of the original mission to the Zellerak front, but he had been presumed dead in a skirmish years ago. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, but there was no mistaking him. He was alive. How? Anya's voice cracked, her mind struggling to process the sight of him. "We thought you were dead," Aaron finished, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "Hardly. I've been here, playing my part." Graves stepped forward, his voice tight with suspicion. "What's going on here? What are you doing?" Aaron didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back to the console, fingers moving swiftly across its surface. "You've walked right into it, haven't you?" he muttered, as though speaking more to himself than to them. "The Zellerak. They've known you were coming for months. Every move you made, every strategy you employed. It's all been anticipated. You're pawns in a game far larger than you understand." Anya's mind was spinning. Why? Why betray us? Aaron's eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a flicker of the man she had once known. A brief, fleeting moment of regret. Then it was gone, replaced by something colder, darker. "Because humanity doesn't deserve peace. Not yet. You're too weak. But you can be part of something greater, Captain. If you're willing to make the right choice." Anya felt the weight of his words, each one a dagger twisted into her chest. Betrayal. It was all betrayal. The mole, the manipulation, the false peace. It was all part of a plan to break humanity once and for all. But now, more than ever, she knew she couldn't give up. Not when everything depended on uncovering the truth. Anya's mind raced as Aaron's words echoed in her ears. Betrayal. It was all coming into focus now, the scattered pieces of a plan she couldn't yet fully grasp, but it was clear enough. Aaron, presumed dead for years, had been living in the shadows, feeding the Zellerak intelligence about humanity's movements, tactics, and weaknesses. She had trusted him, believed in his loyalty. Now, that trust was shattered, part of something greater. Anya's voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of doubt and confusion. You're working for them, the Zelrak. You've been a traitor all along. Aaron's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Working for them. I'm beyond that now. I've seen what humanity is capable of. You're not ready for the future that awaits. The Zelrak offered something more. A chance to evolve beyond the petty squabbles of your species. He took a step toward them, his eyes dark and fervent. Humanity is doomed to destroy itself. You can't see it, but I can. The Zelrak are offering peace, a kind of peace where your race will rise from the ashes. You won't have to fight any longer. The war ends when humanity submits. You will finally understand what true power is, what true unity is. Graves's hand gripped his weapon tighter, his knuckles white with tension. You're a fool, he growled. The Zelrak aren't offering peace. They're offering domination. They'll take everything from us, and you're helping them. Erin's gaze flicked briefly to Graves, but there was no flicker of doubt in his eyes. That's where you're wrong. Domination is what you fear. Power is what you don't understand. The Zelrak are the next step. They've transcended the petty conflicts that have bound your kind for millennia. And they can do the same for you. All you have to do is accept it. Anya's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of it all. She had seen the devastation the Zelrak caused, the suffering they inflicted on colonies and worlds. The promise of peace was nothing more than a thin veil to cover the cruelty of their empire. And now, here was Erin, a man she had once trusted, saying that humanity needed to bend, to become part of the Zelrak's vision of order. But she couldn't let him sway her. Not now, not when humanity had already fought so hard to survive. No, Anya said, her voice hard, her eyes locking onto Erin's. We won't bow to them. Not ever. We'd rather fight to the last, even if we're the last ones standing. Erin's eyes darkened, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You think you have a choice. You think this is some moral high ground you stand on. He shook his head, his voice taking on a darker tone. You're already in too deep. The Zelrak have planned this from the beginning. Your fleet, your station. It's all been part of the test. You were never meant to win. You were meant to bend the knee or die in the attempt. The air in the reactor room grew heavy, the low hum of the core almost deafening now. Anya's mind raced, piecing together everything they had seen, everything they had learned. The signal, the mole, the hidden manipulations, it wasn't just about war anymore. It was about control. And humanity was caught in the crossfire of a power struggle that had been unfolding long before they had even realized it. Her thoughts turned to the crew, to the men and women who had fought alongside her, who had believed in the mission. They deserved more than this. They deserved to know the truth. And if she had to tear down the walls of the Zelrak's empire to give them that truth, then so be it. We will expose everything, Anya said, her voice unwavering. The Zelrak can't control us, and we're not done fighting. Erin's expression twisted into something dark, almost pitying. You think you can fight against something so much bigger than you, against something that has already seen your end. He stepped back, reaching for a console near the wall. You've already lost, Captain. Your crew's fate was sealed the moment you walked into this room. You just don't know it yet. Anya's heart sank. Her instincts screamed that something terrible was coming, something far worse than Erin's betrayal. But warning in his words rang through her mind like a clarion call. She couldn't let it happen. Not now. Graves, Haydn, she barked, her voice rising above the noise in her chest. We need to get out of here. Now. But it was too late. The moment the words left her mouth, the station shuddered beneath their feet, a deep, resonating tremor that rattled the walls and sent sparks flying from the consoles. The reactor's hum shifted to a deep, ominous growl, and then the lights began to flicker. What's happening? Graves shouted over the noise, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Erin's face was now twisted into a knowing smile. You're too late. The station's systems are already compromised. The Zelarak were never going to let you leave here alive. You've played right into their hands. Anya's stomach dropped as realization hit her. This wasn't just a negotiation gone wrong. This was a trap, an execution. The reactor was going critical. The entire station was set to explode, and they were at the center of it. They had to move, or they would all be dead. Get to the escape pods, Anya shouted, grabbing Hayden's arm and pulling her toward the door. But as they turned to flee, a sudden explosion rocked the room. The walls buckled. Time seemed to slow. The lights went out completely. And in the chaos, Anya knew that their fight was far from over. The explosion sent Anya sprawling, her head slamming against the cold metal floor as the world around her seemed to erupt in chaos. The force of the blast knocked her vision askew, the station shaking violently as the lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. All around her, the sounds of emergency alarms blared, accompanied by the distant groans of the station's failing structure. The reactor was on the brink of detonation. "Captain," Graves's voice cut through the disorienting noise, rough and frantic. "We need to move now." Anya blinked, trying to shake off the disorientation. Her body ached, but the urgency of the situation was enough to snap her back to reality. She pushed herself up, gripping the edge of a nearby console for support. The thick smell of burning circuitry and melted metal filled the air. "Where's Hayden?" Anya demanded, scanning the smoke-filled room. She could see Graves moving toward the wreckage of the reactor's control panel, but there was no sign of her lieutenant. She was thrown back when the blast hit. Graves answered, his voice tight with frustration. "I'll go check, Captain. Stay with her if you can." Anya nodded, her thoughts moving faster than her body could keep up. The reactor had been compromised. The station was on the verge of a catastrophic meltdown, and their only hope for survival lay in reaching the escape pods. But the deeper truth was even more urgent. Erin's betrayal. It had been all along a plan to eliminate them, to weaken humanity's last chance at survival. Graves was already heading toward Hayden's location, but just as he turned to move through the smoke, a shadow appeared at the entrance. Anya froze. The shake was unmistakable. Erin. He was alive, his figure barely visible through the haze of the station's failing systems. His eyes glowed with a cold, dangerous certainty. "Erin." Anya's voice cut through the chaos, though it was barely more than a hoarse cry. "What have you done?" "Don't waste your breath, Captain," Erin interrupted, his tone laced with mockery. "You think you can win. There's no victory here. The Zelarak have already sealed your fate. You won't make it out of this station. None of you will." He stepped forward, moving with purpose, and Anya's heart sank as she saw the weapon in his hand. A detonator. The same device that had likely triggered the reactor's meltdown. "You've doomed us all," she said, her voice low but resolute, though the dread gnawing at her gut was undeniable. She could see it in his eyes. He had already written them off as failures, casualties in a larger war he had no intention of losing. The thought of Erin's betrayal, the man she had once trusted, burned within her like a bitter fire. "You were never meant to win," Erin said, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Humanity wasn't supposed to be saved. It was too chaotic, too divided. The Zelarak understand that. They understand how to bring order." Anya's blood boiled. "Not at the cost of everything we are. You've lost yourself, Erin. This isn't about peace. This is about power. You've chosen to destroy us." "Power? You still don't understand," he muttered. "This isn't just about controlling your race. It's about freeing you from your own weaknesses. Under Zelarak rule, you'll have strength. You'll have purpose. All you have to do is kneel." Erin's gaze flickered, as though seeing the anger, the defiance burning in her eyes for the first time. For a brief moment, doubt flashed across his face. Regret, maybe, or something akin to it. But then it was gone, replaced by cold conviction. You've made your choice, and now you'll die with it. But before Erin could press the detonator, the station shook again, more violently this time, and the lights flickered out completely. The hum of the reactor had turned into a low growl, a warning sign of the imminent destruction. Panic surged through Anya's veins, but she pushed it aside. They had no time left. The escape pods were their only chance. Graves reappeared through the haze, pulling Hayden with him, her face pale but determined. "We need to go," Graves said, his voice grim. "Now." Anya's pulse raced as she locked eyes with Erin. She could feel the tension thick in the air. One wrong move, and they would all be lost. The detonator still glowed in his hand, but Anya's instincts kicked in. There was no way they were dying here. "Graves, get her to the pods." Anya barked, her eyes never leaving Erin's. "I'll hold him off." "No, Captain," Graves started, but Anya cut him off. "You don't have a choice. Just go." With a sharp nod, Graves grabbed Hayden and started pulling her toward the exit. Anya didn't wait to see if they made it out. She focused on Erin, who had turned toward her, his eyes now shadowed with something that almost seemed like sorrow. "You're too late," Erin whispered, his finger hovering over the detonator. "The station is already dead. All I need to do is press this, and it's over. You'll never make it." Anya's mind raced as she took a step forward, her heart pounding with an urgency she had never felt before. The detonator was his power. If he pressed it, they were all finished. But if she could disarm it, she might have a chance. In a sudden, explosive move, Anya lunged forward, knocking Erin's hand away from the detonator. They collided, rolling across the floor, a struggle for control that felt like an eternity. Erin snarled, but Anya's grip was fierce, desperate. She could hear the sound of the countdown echoing through her mind. The countdown to destruction. In the struggle, Anya finally managed to knock the detonator from his hand, sending it skittering across the floor. With a single, swift motion, she aimed her weapon and fired. The shot struck Erin in the shoulder, forcing him to collapse with a grunt of pain. As he fell to the ground, blood staining the floor, Anya stood over him, panting. The detonator was still out of reach. She could hear the countdown, seconds ticking away, but it was enough. The explosion that followed was deafening, shaking the very foundation of the station. The reactor had gone critical. Anya didn't look back. She sprinted toward the escape pods, knowing it would be the last time she would see the station standing. The war wasn't over, but humanity had a chance to fight another day.